We were talking about the alphabet people the other day. People had some questions about that or some comments. So let's start with those. Here we have a fellow says, I don't think it's genetic, meaning, whether transsexuals and all this stuff that we're seeing today, whether it's got to do with genes, right? Which is our argument here. It's socially engineered from the top down. Uh-huh. And so he talks about the current social engineering, the rich people, I guess, politicians, whoever up there that's running the show. The West is run by hostile elites, okay? Then he says something which is of interest to me, at least. 3 decades ago, these things didn't exist. And that's not enough time for such a radical evolutionary change to occur. And we're going to challenge that, okay? Let's go with the next fellow, and he says the following. He says, I came here for physics, not for LGBT stuff. Come on, Bill. Need to guard children from them. Why do we need to guard children from them? Is it contagious or what? Or do you think this is an issue of education? And if you do, well, we're going to challenge that as well, okay? And then another fellow says, related to that, he says, all problems we have on Earth come from human overpopulation. The solution is not more babies, because we're saying that the expansion of the human race, the growth rate, population growth rate, is slowing down. And I guess this fellow says, hey, that's a good sign. We're overpopulated as it is. And because we're overpopulated, that's why we're having a lot of these problems, okay? Well, we're going to challenge all of these gentlemen here, okay? They have their say, and we're going to challenge that. So let's go with the first one, and that's that, the global population has increased at a very small rate over the last thousands of years, really. And it was just in the 19th century, going into the 20th century, that's when population really exploded. We were only about 1 billion people in 1820, and that, you'll get different values for different analysts, but that's a more or less good number to consider. 1 billion, 1820, thereabouts. That's for the whole planet. Today we're 8 times as many. We're 8 billion people, and we come pretty much from those ancestors, okay? And the issue is, are we going to continue growing exponentially? The answer is no, and then there's only 3 possibilities. We either go up, continue to expand, we go more or less, maintain a global population around, 8 or 9 billion, or we go to extinction. And guess what we propose here? We're saying that we're going down to extinction. And it's got really little to do with population, in the sense that it's not that the growth of population is going to slow down and then we're just going to whittle down to 0. No. It's going to be an exponential drop. We're all going to die almost simultaneously. Okay, so it's not a gradual decline. That's what we're going to argue here. If it were a background extinction, it would. We say that humans will die in a mass extinction. We die all of a sudden. Okay, so, and there's nothing we can do about it. And it's guaranteed. It's not that say, well, maybe. No, it's guaranteed. Okay, that's what we propose here. Okay, I'm just going to show a fellow who talked about genetic diversity. We say that we have lost our genetic diversity over the centuries, and a lot of people have problems with that. They think that any species, whether plant or animal, gains genetic diversity because we have new mutations every day. That's their notion. That's the worldly wisdom. And we're saying that's absolutely not true. At least that's not what we vouch for here. We say something different. We say that a species can only lose genetic diversity. It has no way of gaining genetic diversity. By that I mean the whole pool. Okay, I don't mean just 1 or 2 individuals. I'm saying the whole population. as a whole, it can only lose genetic diversity. And I have a graph that's in one of my books, okay? And it looks more or less like that. You can see that the species can only lose genetic diversity, especially when it becomes sedentary. It no longer migrates, and we are not migrating people anymore. That age has long gone, okay? It's a steady decline, and it's got to do with a couple factors. One of them is the founder's effect, and the other one is population bottlenecks. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail there, but all we say here is that we can only lose genetic diversity. Okay, and because of that, yeah, this fellow says, well, can that happen in 30 years that because of our loss of genetic diversity, there are such major changes that we see all around us? Okay, and I think there's two factors there, and one is that we have more information today, and a lot of people have come out of the closet. So those are two factors that influence that. But I just want to address essentially these three fellows with Calhoun's experiments. Okay, and that's John Calhoun ran experiments from, what is it, 1948 to 1975. Number 25, what is it, Utopian Universe. Number 25 was his, I guess, masterpiece, you could say, his main experiment. He put four pairs of mice, male and females, normal mice, you would say, but remember, it took them out of the existing stocks. It's not like he went out hunting, in the wild for mice. No, he just said, give me four pairs of mice, and then he gave him four pairs of mice. That's what he started out with. And there we have our perfect problem, because those mice were already, we'd have to look at their genetics. And I don't think he did that. He was a psychologist. He was studying behavior, okay? And the main thing I got out of his experiments, he's the first guy. I've seen a couple other experiments, but I will concede to him being the first guy to produce homosexuality in the lab. Okay, he produced it with animals. He did not produce it with the people who are on top of us, who impose governments on us. None of that, elites and so on. It's got nothing at all to do with that. Okay, it's got to do with genetics, with biology. Okay. And it's got to do with two things. First, the fact that they started out with this founder's effect, four pairs of mice. Okay, they were normal in general. Male got a female and made his nest, and the other guys did the same thing. So you have four houses. Essentially, that's the starting point. And from there, they ended up with 2,200 mice after several generations. And towards the end of that process, and he did this, he did this experiment many times, at least 25 times, and he ended up with homosexuals and autists. Okay, the mice, as he said, had stopped being mice. Okay, and this is what his experiment looks like. Okay, he had this, I guess it was like a 9 square feet space, and he just allowed the mice to do anything they wanted. They had all the food they wanted. They had all the water they wanted. They had no predators. They had no diseases, and they just multiplied. At first it was heaven. It was, they were in paradise. But as the population grew and you had density dependence, birth rates and so on, that's when the mice started acting kind of weird. And John Calhoun suggested that this is what is happening to the human race. Okay, there's the whole apparatus. Okay, he had them in there. Okay, so this is how he started. And let me remove this. Okay, so that was his experiment. And again, it had nothing to do with rulers imposing things on the please be low. None of that. Okay, and this is how the experiment went. It ended. All of them ended up in extinction. He did it with mice. He did it with rats also. They all ended up in extinction. They all had the same curve where you have an exponential growth at first, then the curve, starts getting asymptotic, and then finally ends up in extinction. They stop having children. The females become aggressive. Okay, they don't mate. Sounds like like humans today. So you got to look at John Calhoun's experiment. You might change your mind about a lot of stuff out there. Okay, all I can say is what we're seeing today, I think, has to do with biology and not with politics. I don't think it's a question of nurture; it's a question of nature. And it's got to do again with population bottlenecks. In this case, they did not have that except one when it crashed and finally went down. But it does have to do with founder's effect. Remember, the grandfathers of these were the four couples. Okay, they were around for a while, and eventually, they created this whole population. So they all come from the same genes, and they didn't have the factor of the bottleneck factor, but they did have the density dependent factor, and that's another issue you should research if you're interested in the subject. Anyways, changing a little bit the subject, we say that humans will die not because of this, because of population bottlenecks or genetic diversity problems. No, it's going to be the economy that's going to. We die in a mass extinction. Mass extinction is related to the collapse of the global economy. That's what we propose here. Okay, and here's a bit of news that came out the other day. China's record unemployment has some young people seeking simpler life, and it talks about some of the problems that the youth in China have. And what it is a lot of them went to school, to college and so on, but there are not enough jobs for them. In other words, for the new generations. And it says, you had a huge expansion of university education in China over the last couple of decades, creating a surplus of youth competing for limited white-collar jobs. Meanwhile, a lot of jobs that the economy is creating are blue-collar jobs. Okay, so in their situation, they have services. The economy converted into a service economy. The Chinese economy, for the first time, more than 50% of GDP came from services instead of manufacturing. That was about a few years ago. It was around 2014, 2015, thereabouts. And today, there's more services than as far as GDP is concerned, right? As a percentage of GDP and as a percentage of labor, there's more services than manufacturing. And that number is just going to continue increasing on the service side and decreasing on the manufacturing side. It's happened to all economies in the world. It is happening to all economies on the planet. Not a single one is an exception. Okay, all of humanity is becoming service-oriented and stopping manufacturing. What's the problem with that? Well, like I like to say, you're standing next to God there, in heaven. You're looking down on the planet, okay, from space. What do you see? Well, you see what is constructed, what humans have constructed. You see the tangible stuff. You see houses, you see highways, you see boats, cars, planes, you see fields of corn. That's what you see from up there. You do not see the contracts. You do not see the banking transactions. You do not see the interest rates. None of that contracts, etc. None of that belongs to services is what you see. The promises, they're not there. And most of the work today is going into that region, into the region where it's invisible. Services are intangible. Okay, so we're putting people into the intangible world and taking them out of the tangible world, specifically from agriculture. And agriculture in the advanced nations has already almost practically disappeared. You only have 1 to 2% in most advanced nations with agriculture. About 14, 15%, maybe even up to 20% is manufacturing, and 80% is services. And every country in the world is moving in that direction. We're moving, and I call services unemployment. So if you're in the service industry, you say, hey, I got a job, you're not producing anything. All you're doing is exchanging money around, and that money ultimately comes down to buying the food that you need to live one more day. Okay, so it's the agriculture that's come down. We're so efficient at it that, we don't need agriculture. We don't even pay attention to it because we say, hey, I want something. I'll just go to the corner store and get it, a potato or whatever you want, Not even that, because people go to fast food restaurants and it's already manufactured, packaged, and the whole works for you, right? All you have to do is have money. How did you get that money? Someone gave it to you. And so we're passing money around in the service industry eventually to buy stuff that keeps us alive one more day, which is known as food. Okay, so when the global economy collapses, in the days of the Neanderthals, Paleolithic, Cro-Magnon, everybody got their own food. You were in direct contact with food. Okay, hunter-gatherers, in those days, they caught their own stuff. Since then, we've gotten away from the only thing that keeps us alive, which is food. And today we go through intermediaries, middlemen, and they get the food for us. We don't even know how they produce it. We don't know where it comes from, how it's transported, none of that. We know nothing of that. All we know is we go to the store and magically it appears on the shelves. That's how efficient we are. And it's efficiency that's going to kill us. Okay, just to show you, here's another country. He just had an election. That's Turkey, and they voted for Mr. Erdogan again. United States is not very happy about that. Anyways, they voted for him despite, they say, this article here says, despite that Turkey is undergoing some economic problems. Okay. And it says critics blame the crisis on Erdogan's policy of keeping interest rates low, okay? Economists generally recommend raising rates to combat inflation, because one of the problems is inflation. They have skyrocketing rents, okay, and they have problem buying basic goods, okay? Sounds like a common story that we see in every country in the world. Okay, and it says, again, inflation, the fact that they say public spending is unsustainable, minimum wage problems, pension increases, etc., etc., etc. All the problems that every country in the world today has. There is no exception to this. You pick the country. You want to pick Peru, you want to pick some Uganda, you pick the country. And you'll see that it's got the same problems. We all have the same problems. Okay, and the question is whether that's going to continue or whether the global economy is going to crash. When it crashes, what do we mean by crash? It means that money will be no more. Nobody will accept money. If nobody accepts money, we're all dead, because we need money to buy food, and nobody will work for money, nobody will accept money, and nobody who produces food will accept money. So why will they produce or distribute, transport the food to you if you've got nothing to give them except some paper or some number on the internet? Okay, that's it. And so here's the trend that we can see in the last maybe 100,000, 200,000 years. We were hunter-gatherers for most of those those years. Maybe 10, 15, up to 20,000 years ago, maybe we started doing farming, some kind of farming. It's known as the Neolithic. And then we went into manufacturing about 300 years ago, 200, 300 years ago, industrialization, some countries, not all countries in the world. And today we're in the service world, and we've pushed the other sectors. We're squashing them, we're muscling them aside. Okay, what is services? Unemployment. And that's on top of the formal unemployment that we have. So the question is, what's the next category? If we've already done manufacturing services, where's the next category going to come from? What is the next category? And to make things worse, within the service economy, we've moved into services, into internet services. Before, we used to have some hands-on services like, barbering or landscaping. Those require hands. They're services, scratching your back, that requires a service. That involves touch, right? Handling or whatever. Today, the services are moving more, going in an abstract direction. Today, services are internet services, and there's nothing tangible there for sure. So that's the trend, okay? How are we going to die? Well, here's an article that tells you what happened in the past. We disagree a little bit with it, in fact, quite a bit. And here it is. It says South African fossil reveal ancient beast's epic journey to oblivion. Talks about the Permian and the fact that you had these mammal-like reptiles at the end of the show, at the end of the Permian, that died. Why? Because they say volcanism happened. And that's unlike what happened in the Cretaceous, where an asteroid allegedly hit the Earth and killed the dinosaurs. Okay, so we have these catastrophes, comets and volcanism, and there's a couple more. Here's a general idea of what these people propose. They say there's climate change, there's gamma rays. You know, these are the proposals today, the most important ones. Okay, and the question is whether any of these had anything whatsoever to do with the extinction of these animals. And here we say none of them had anything whatsoever to do with the extinction of the animals. Okay, so here's the Permian, more or less. This is what they suggest. There were explosions, especially from the volcanoes in India. Okay, and they covered the land. Essentially, that's what they're saying. And so when this spread throughout the world, it also affected a little bit the climate. Okay, and so all these factors together killed the animals. That's what they say. And the problem that all these theories have is selectivity. They cannot explain how one species died and another one survived. And that's the only issue they don't address. Or sometimes they make it even worse. They have an ad hoc mechanism for each species or for each family or for each plant, because we're not only talking about animals here. Okay, and so these were the couple of the animals, you know, that lived towards the end of the Cretaceous, the Permian, and they are mammal-like reptiles. You can see they look more or less like a lion and something similar to that. The difference is that these animals laid eggs. So they were not mammals. They were mammal-like. They were tigers that laid eggs. Okay, think of it that way. So they were mammal reptiles, so to speak. They had features of both. Some little animal, maybe in the wings, was the one that gave birth to humans eventually. Okay, because I'm sure that we can trace our lineage all the way to the Cambrian and before, pre-Cambrian. Okay, some animal gave us birth, some lineage that was there in the wings, tiny animal probably, and eventually exploded and gave birth to the mammals, and from mammals came us. And others believe that it was God's magic wand. So we have these versions. Cretaceous, this is the main one, and you can see I think it's a bunch of baloney. An asteroid hits the Earth, you have all this brimstone falling on the Earth, creating all these fire tsunamis, burn the animals, I guess, you know, and the whole planet was covered in fires. We had the Earth was a cinder. Okay, that's the official version. Okay, and again, the question is, if that happened, how do you explain selectivity? How do you explain that some plants survived, especially the angiosperms, right? The ones that really stayed behind were the conifers, the gymnosperms. So you got to explain that selectivity. That's what you got to explain. Otherwise, you don't have a theory of extinction. And not a single paleontologist on Earth has it. Okay, and so here you have this is what they portray. You know, that you have all this fire coming down and stones from the explosion. They fall on the poor dinosaurs, and there you see the comet hitting the Earth. That was it, you know, or the asteroid, right? And so this is it. This is what they propose. And the issue is, they say it fell in the ocean, fell in the waters, really in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, and so another version or a parallel version, because they need to find out how to kill all the animals, right? And here's this version, which is that it created these tsunamis that flooded the land and just drowned everything out. So we have the fire version and the water version, fire water, right? Okay, so water covered the land. I guess this is like the biblical 40 nights and 40 days of, Noah's Ark. more or less. That's the version. So they can't make up their mind whether the plants and animals were killed by fire or by water. And then you have the animals underneath the sea, especially the reptiles. Here you have the mosasaur. Okay, this is what he looked like. They show him killing a shark there, but really the mosasaurs, they're apparently, from what the studies show, they were primarily hunters of ammonites. They loved ammonites. And it turns out that the ammonites ate certain types of plankton, looked like this, foraminifera, the forams. Okay, and you can see the ones from the Cretaceous compared to what followed, which were much smaller. The ones from our days were much smaller than the ones from the Cretaceous. So the ammonites ate these Cretaceous forams, and the mosasaurs ate the ammonites. So that was the chain. It turns out all three disappear. Now that's funny. How did the asteroid do that underneath the sea? That's what you get to answer. Okay, so what do we propose here? Well, we say the same thing that happened to the dinosaurs and the same thing happened to the Permian mammal-like reptiles, the synapsids, will happen to us, and we cannot escape that same process. Here's the process. I'm going to show it for the terrestrial days of the Cretaceous. Not going to talk about water or air, okay? Just, not air and sea, but just land. And here it is. It's known as the Cretaceous Terrestrial Revolution. What happened was from almost the first third, maybe even half of the Cretaceous, you had the angiosperms. They expanded throughout the land and muscled aside all the conifers, which is what the dinosaurs ate, specifically the cycad-like, the cycadioids, plants like the Williamsonias and so on. So they muscled aside the angiosperms, muscle aside the gymnosperms, which is what the animals ate, the ruling animals, the dinosaurs ate, and eventually the forest dried up. They didn't disappear completely. Not all gymnosperms disappeared, but it took out so much from the dinosaurs that they had trouble finding food. And so they died in a mass extinction, which is the lack of food. The ecological pyramid is what overturns. Okay, and here's what I'm talking about. Here's a graph for you can see it. Okay, the demographic pyramid of the plants overturns over time because, again, they've been around for too long. Their genetic diversity disappears. They've changed so much over the years that they can't change no more. Okay? Mother Nature doesn't have any more capacity to make them change anymore, and so they reach a point where they can't expand. They can't occupy new niches. Okay. And meanwhile, you have the new plants, which in this case were the angiosperms, which are muscling them aside, which are more vibrant, which are more advanced plants. And that's what the new generation of animals that's going to take over, the mammals, are going to be eating. They expand, they radiate with the new types of plants, with the angiosperms. And the dinosaurs were stuck with the conifers, specifically the cycadioids and cycad-like plants, and those are the ones that disappear. Okay, and yeah, when they disappear, it turns out, the dinosaurs disappear. No comment necessary. It's just a regular evolution. Okay, and what you have for the animals, is the overturning of the ecological pyramid, which you see at the bottom there, and it's the many chasing the few. The plants world dies under their feet. And so they're competing for ever fewer resources. And that's essentially what's going to happen to humans. And there's no way we can do anything about that. Why? Because if money is no more, and again, that's a long story to explain why we end up with no money or nobody wanting money anymore. If money is no more, no one has an incentive to produce or distribute food. And we're all dependent today, on someone doing that for us. 90% of humanity, maybe, or some countries more, some countries less, but a lot of people in the world depend on, nobody grows his own food, especially in an apartment in a city. We all depend on someone else to bring the food to us, and that's the only thing that keeps us alive. And if money disappears, how are you going to get food? Well, I'll tell you how. You're going to grab a gun, go out into the country or to your neighbor, and you're going to take that food away from them. That's the way it's going to happen. So there's going to be murder, cannibalism, the whole works. And that happened, I think, at the end of the Cretaceous as well, when you had some of these T-Rexes, some of these big animals, and they started killing each other as well. I mean, when you're hungry, you eat your own kind. So get ready for it. Okay, that's what our future looks like, and it's probably going to happen quite soon. I think within my days, maybe. Certainly anyone who's 20 years old, 30 years old, I think they're going to see the end of the world.